Tonight's speaker is one of the most famous men in this field, in the UFO field, responsible for kindling many of our interests in the UFO field. His first book, Chariots of the Gods, was a multi-million seller. Since then, he has written 27 books, is it? 24 books, many of which are on the same subject, but further enlightening us on those subjects. Also, there are quite a few that are actually in German and not available to us, unfortunately. But Erich von Däniken is probably one of the most influential people, if not the most influential person in the early days of the study of this field. It gives me real pleasure to welcome to our stage Erich von Däniken.
Okay, finally, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very happy to be back in the United States, in California, since 25 years. That's the first time. And and of course, I'd like to thank Mufon, Los Angeles, for the invitation. And I'd like to thank all of you for being here and listening to me this evening. According to official sciences, there are no such things like UFOs. There are no extraterrestrials. And if they would be out there, they would look completely different to us. And if they would be and look completely different to us, they could never reach us because the distances between the stars are much too high. I don't know where all this rubbish comes from, but it's yesterday's answers. None of them is true. Unfortunately, I do not have time to go into every little detail, otherwise we would have a university talk. But one thing is clear, even with our primitive technology of today, we could reach the distances of the light years. Just imagine a gigantic generation spaceship. This is feasible. In here now, whole families would live. The parents would make children, the children would make children, and so on, and maybe only generation, das kann man schwer vermachen, generation number 12 would reach the goal. Of course, it would be a very boring life, but theoretically, it is possible to do it. What do we know about extraterrestrials, about their lifespan, and so on? Now, the funny thing is that exactly this vision or this idea, which I have spelled out now, is a fact in the old holy Indian books. There, the books, which are Sanskrit texts, thousands of years old, there you can read, jetzt möchtest du das Video bringen, that long time ago, gigantic cities surrounded our planet. These cities, we would call them mother spaceship, always stayed in orbit. They never reached the ground. But out of these cities, smaller vehicles have come down. In the old Indian literature, these vehicles are called the Vimanas. There are several types of Vimanas. What you see here is not my imagination, is not our imagination. We made these computer animations exactly according to the old Indian texts. So different types of Vimanas are described in these ancient books. Some of them must have looked like this one. Others had the shape of an egg. Some of them were extremely noisy. Others were absolutely silent, quiet. People were shocked when the shadows of these objects fell into their valleys. And in one of the old Indian texts, you can clearly read that finally 3 of these cities reached together on the firmament. A gigantic war between the gods had begun. glittering rays were seen in the nightly sky. Some of the cities were destroyed, and for the earthling down on earth, it looked as if thousands and thousands of little stars would fall down on the ground. What you hear is not imagination, it's a fact in the old Indian literature. All the exact quotes you of course find in my book. Now you don't have to go far away to India to look in old holy books for indications of extraterrestrials. You can do it at home too. I mean, everyone here is aware of the case of the prophet Ezekiel in the Old Testament. Now, I have new material concerning Ezekiel. Read Ezekiel. You will find him on the end of the Bible, of the Old Testament. By the way, I have to apologize sometimes. My mother language is Swiss. My second language is German. The third language is French. Now, English is number 4. And always when I'm back in America, I need a few days to get into the language again. So forgive me if I may spell something a little wrong, but you will understand it. Now, okay. So, Ezekiel, you have to know about him professionally. Ezekiel was high priest on the Temple of Jerusalem. And in his time, whole Jerusalem was taken over. It was a war between the Babylonians and Jerusalem. And the high society of Jerusalem was captured from the Babylonians. So they went all to Babylonians and they were handled like slaves. Ezekiel was one of them. And why he was captured, something very strange occurred. From the northwest of the sky, a vehicle came down. The men who worked down there, they saw the vehicle. And first they heard the noise. Ezekiel described the noise with the thundering of a waterfall. Finally, this object comes down. Everybody runs away, lay on the ground. After a few minutes, it becomes quiet. Ezekiel hears a strange voice in his own language who says, "Don't be afraid, human being." Just imagine for a while that this would be a vision of God. Well, as we know, God knows everything. God is almighty. If this would have been a vision, why would God say, "Don't be afraid, human being"? God would know the name of this fellow lying on the ground. But these extraterrestrials don't know the name. They cannot say, "Don't be afraid, Ezekiel," because they don't know his name, at least not in the beginning. So still Ezekiel is afraid. Finally, he becomes calmer and he starts to describe what he sees in every detail. He sees something, a big object. He calls the whole thing the splendorness of God. On top of it, he sees something like a diamond. And inside the diamond, there is a throne. And on the throne, somebody is sitting, looking like a man in glittering clothes. And a little further down, he sees 4 living creatures. These living creatures had wings, each one 4 wings. And when the wings moves, he hears this terrible noise, which he compared with the thundering of a waterfall. Lower, he sees some wheels. He described 4 wheels, and he says it looked as if one wheel were in the middle of another wheel. And they went they were straight forward, and they turned not as they went. And under the wheels, he sees the legs. He describes the legs. They look metallic, like sparkling metal, and so on and so on. I don't want to have Ezekiel speech. 25 years ago, I had a lecture at NASA, here in Huntsville, National Aeronautics and Space Administration. And there a group of engineers were. Among them was Mr. Joseph Brumlich. He was the head of the engineers. And he was very astonished about my speech and about Ezekiel. And he said to himself, "This is impossible. Come on, in the Bible we will not find something which you could interpret technically." So he went to the libraries, came back with a few Bibles, because in every Bible you have different interpretation and different translations. And Mr. Joseph Blumrich and a few men around him started to take Ezekiel literally, word by word. If this story is true, how would the object which he described have looked like? That's the result of it. This is what Ezekiel calls the splendorness of God. This is not a spaceship with which you could move toward the stars. We would call it a space shuttle. The old Indian call it a vimana. It's one of these vehicles which just served between the surface of the Earth and the mother spaceship which was surrounding the Earth. On top, Ezekiel sees the diamond with the throne inside, while the command station with the view around, and of course the pilot's seat. He describes the living beings with their wings. But in reality, as you see, these are helicopters. Why doesn't he use the word helicopter? Because in his time, something like a helicopter does not exist. He has no idea. He believes that these beings must be alive because they move, and later the legs, and so on. If you read Ezekiel in the Bible, and you continue to read, in chapter 40, he says that this object arrived a second time. The second time he's not afraid anymore because he knows them in between. And the second time they took him and put him up here into the command station. Obviously he's now seated at the co-pilot's seat. And they bring him away, they fly him away, and Ezekiel states, they brought me on a very, very high mountain. He repeats this twice, very, very high mountain. And he continues by saying, oh, thank you, it's okay. Oops. If this works, okay. He looks down and he says, beneath me, I had something like a city. It was not a city, something like a city. And in the center of it was something like a temple. And the splendorness of God entered directly into the temple, which means in practice the temple had no roof. Otherwise the object couldn't go in. Again he hears the noise of the living creatures, the terrible noise. Finally it becomes silent, and outside of the temple wall there is a man Ezekiel describes in glittering clothes. This man in glittering clothes has a measuring instrument in his hand, or a measurement, and he gives this measurement, he hands it to Ezekiel, and he commands that Ezekiel should measure the whole temple. Now Ezekiel himself is astonished. He doesn't understand the situation anymore. He has the courage to ask back to this man, why? What for should I measure this temple? And the answer was, that's the reason why we brought you here. So he starts measuring. Just read Ezekiel, chapter 42. Pages of pages, exact measuring. The length, the width, how high it was, the stairs, everything is on measurement. A German engineer, a few years ago, his name is Hans Herbert Bayer, he was astonished about these measurements. And he said, what kind of building could this be? And he again took Ezekiel literally. He did not add 1 inch. He took nothing off. He exactly took the measurements of Ezekiel, started to calculate, to reconstruct, and to design. And as you see, the building looked almost like a stadium. And the space shuttle, or the Vimana, fits exactly into it. In this case, we have a proof by indication. 2 groups on 2 different continents. NASA, here in the United States, in Huntsville, and the German engineer Bayer. NASA only take the first part of the book of Ezekiel, and the outcome of it was this. The German fellow only took the second part of the book of Ezekiel, the so-called temple, and the outcome was this. And both fit together. Now here we should maybe lose a few words about the theologians. If you hear a priest talking about Ezekiel, they tell you that Ezekiel had in reality a vision. He saw God on his throne coming down to earth, on his wagon coming down to earth. I never understood why God needs a wagon to come to earth, but anyhow, that's another question. And then They say when Ezekiel makes his measurement about this temple, he's in reality having a vision of a future temple in a future Jerusalem. But this can't be true. Why not? Ezekiel himself described, they brought me on a very, very high mountain. I'm sorry, in Jerusalem and around Jerusalem, there are no high mountains. I know the region very well, a few hills, that's all. Then he looks down and he say, beneath me was something like a city. Well, Ezekiel grew up in Jerusalem. He knows his city, he knows the streets. If it would have been Jerusalem, he would say, well, down I saw Jerusalem. But it's not Jerusalem. And he continues by saying, and in the middle of it was something like a temple. Why does he say like a temple? He himself, by profession, is high priest on the temple. For God's sake, he should know what a temple is. Why does he say why? It looks like a temple. Because it's not a temple. Maybe we should ask us here, what was the meaning of the word temple some thousands of years in the past? A temple was nothing else than a building in which the gods lived. If you look at it this way, the translation temple is still correct. But on what purpose should all this have been done? Just imagine the following situation. A group of extraterrestrials is observing, and this damned light now go a little off here that we see more of the screen. A group of extraterrestrials is observing Ezekiel and his men working outside of the city of Babylon. They observe of a distance and they learn the language of Ezekiel. They come down, they take Ezekiel. Why Ezekiel? Because he's the leader of the group, the most intelligent one. They bring him to their base station, which was on a high, high mountain somewhere on this planet. And there the man who's glittering gives him the measurement and orders him to measure the whole temple. And then they bring him back to his own people. Why? They knew exactly that the generation of Ezekiel could not understand what was going on. This generation believed that all this had to do something with God, especially if they took their high priest. So after he's brought back, his people would ask him, where have you been? What have they done with you? And he would explain and tell the story what happened to him. Now, because his word is heavy, his word has weight, this story is not thrown away. It is written down and handed down for generations. And after thousands and thousands of years in the future, the generations will understand that this had nothing to do with God. It was a technical report. And it worked. As you see, because of Ezekiel, we have the modern interpretation. And this modern interpretation makes much more sense than every interpretation of yesterday. Yesterday's interpretation, they asked us, well, you have to believe this. This is a miracle. I don't want to believe too much. I try to know much more. And Ezekiel is only one case out of the holy books of mankind which we interpreted in our modern way. And it always makes much more sense than ever before. Now, I have to tell you a short story in between. In our century, we have a new cult. Every anthropologist knows about it. This cult is called a cargo cult. What is a cargo cult? Whenever a technological high society comes together with a technologically underdeveloped society, the underdeveloped do not understand what this technology is. They think it's something magic. It's a force coming from out there, maybe from the gods. We can prove this in our century, because in our century we have more than 100 of these so-called cargo cults. The first ethnologist who visited in a flying machine New Guinea, he was very shocked when he realized that the natives every evening they came on a canoe to his flying machine, and here they sacrificed a pork. The pork was not sacrificed for the human being. The pork was sacrificed for the aircraft, because they believed the aircraft is a bird from heaven, something which belonged to the God. Your country, in the Second World War, Americans were fighting against Japan in the Pacific Ocean. Many little islands were taken over, also the island of Vevak. The Americans made landing with their propellant aircrafts. After the Americans left, the natives started to reconstruct, to build models of aircrafts out of wood and straw. And they believe that these are birds from the gods. They adored it, worshipped it, and prayed to it. In this example, the natives could not even say that this is an aircraft, because they have no word for aircraft. They could not say that this is a propeller. They don't know what a propeller is. They cannot say that in here there is an engine and fuel. They have no idea of it. All what they do is copying the outside as a model and believing that we have to adore this because it belongs to the god. So this cargo cult always occurs when a technological high society comes together with a technological low society. And this was happening in our century. We can prove thousands of years in the past. It started in old Sumeria, 5,000 years ago. On the Sumerian cylinder seals, and there are hundreds of them, you find the ships of the gods on the sky with the so-called gods inside. Of course, in China it's the same thing. The old Chinese emperor descended in a fiery chariot from the clouds. These were the first Chinese emperors. The same thing in Central America. It doesn't matter if you take the Mayan or the Aztecs or the Toltecs, they all believe that their gods have some houses or palaces in the clouds. They came down and teach the humans. But this goes on in old Japan, about 1000 BC. Of a sudden, hundreds of these figures were worshipped. They were kept on altars, they prayed on it. But 1000 BC, that was Stone Age in Japan. Nobody had any idea of these glasses, these helmets, these suits. So what they have been copying, it's cargo cult, nothing else. Misunderstanding technology. Of course, this goes back. In every big museum, you find some of these figures, most with a stupid interpretation down. Here they say, well, it's a god from Colombia. Of course it's a god of Colombia. But what god? Now we all know there is only one real God. So why are our ancestors speaking about the gods in plural? Extraterrestrials descended. Our ancestors at that time were the primitives. They could not understand what was going on. Their belief was these ETs must be some gods. Of course, this is rubbish. We know there is only one God. But that's how it entered into the mythologies, into the holy books, into the religions, and so on. The gods have visited us. And the so-called gods themselves, they also took care that mankind of the future would come to the right questions. This is France, Brittany, near the Atlantic Ocean. The nearest town is Karnak. There are 15,000 stones in different lines. This is for kilometers long. It's not just a few. The stones are all made out of granite. Of course, this is about 5,000 years BC old. Now, man is intelligent. He seems to be, some of them. They try to find the answer. What is this? Why have our ancestors done such a thing thousands of years in the past? Had they no other problems? Of course, the first idea was, well, these must be some tombstones. Now, the stones were cut down and never a bone or a grave was found. Later, the farmers in the region, they believed that maybe the stones themselves contain something very valuable, like maybe there is gold inside or silver. Now they arrived with big hammers and destroyed the stones. Of course there was nothing inside. A Christian legend even tells us, no, these are all Roman soldiers made out into stone by God, because he wanted to punish them in a way or another. George, siehst du mich noch? Der Typ macht mich wahnsinnig. Bring's nächste Video. Only now a time, when we made exact measurements on the inch and observations and photographs from the air, we realized, das kann man auch scharf einstellen am vordersten Ding, we realized, nein, nicht der macht am vorderen Ring. Sorry, I'm talking German in the meantime. Okay, jetzt wird es ein bisschen schärfer. We realized that all these stones in French Brittany are not just lying around as a coincidence, they are all here on purpose. It's full of high geometry. Here you find more than 22 Pythagorean triangles. Maybe you remember Pythagoras was a Greek mathematician. He was living about 450 BC in Greece. And he was the one who came up with geometrical laws like a square and b square are c square and so on. But all this has nothing to do with Pythagoras, because this is thousands of years older than Pythagoras. And now we have a real problem. On the one hand, we know for sure that our Stone Age people, thousands of years in the past, they had no knowledge of high geometry. On the other hand, it remains a fact that these stone lines are a geometrical pattern. How do we solve the problem? So that you understand me correct, I have never had the impression that extraterrestrials made these geometrical patterns. No, they never used their hands. They never made their hands dirty, but it was much easier. The primitive humans believed that these extraterrestrials are some gods. So they worshipped them, adored them. All what the gods had to do is to give commands, to order. Okay, now here is one line, a rope. You see, I want to have 1,200 stones on this line. And the primitives did it. But for what purpose? What should that be for the extraterrestrials? According to the old holy books, the so-called gods created man after their own image, which means we think in a similar way than they. We have an evolution in a similar way than their evolution, which means again, we are intelligent. Intelligent means asking questions. We have a curiosity, a scientific curiosity. So all what they had to do, thousands of years ago, lay out on the ground geometrical pattern, and then wait. The rest goes by itself. Thousands of years pass. They knew exactly, even if half of this stone block throughout the thousands of years would be destroyed, it doesn't matter. Mankind of the future must see it. They stumble over. It's too big. Now, because they are intelligent and they have a curiosity, they will ask themselves, what is it? And they come to answer, well, must be tombstones. Then they realize, no, it's no tombstones. Well, must be gold in it. Then they realize there's no gold in it. So, because you are intelligent, you never end up with questions until you have a final conclusive answer. And they knew that. They knew that sooner or later in the future, one of our clever humans would come here with exact measurements, and of a sudden he will realize, my God, this is geometry. How geometry? And then the right question raises up. If this could be a coincidence, which is not, we have too many of these coincidences in the deep past. And they're always related with the so-called gods. They are always dating back to Stone Age. Everyone here is familiar, of course, with Stonehenge. Since centuries, they tell us, and they tell it in the universities, the poor boys have to learn it, that this was a calendar. Of course, you can use it as a calendar, no doubt. But to have a calendar, you can do it much easier. Just hammer a piece of wood in the ground, or make a scratch on your wall, on your rock. The sun will pass every year on your scratch, and you have a calendar. It's really easier. But now they tell us that was different because it was very, very important for the high priest to know in advance when spring would come and summer would come. This would be important for agriculture. I'm sorry, for what agriculture? There was no agriculture in Stone Age time. But it doesn't matter, that's what they are told. Now, I just ask you to imagine all this in practice. For our calendar, our today's calendar, the 21st of March means the beginning of spring. Now imagine in the night of the 21st of March, 3,000 Stone Age people are sitting here. It's cold, they are frozen a little. They wait until the sun goes up between two stones. Now the high priest announces, my friend, this is spring. Now you have to put the seeds into the ground. But what are these priests doing if, for example, on the 21st of March, the snow is still on the ground? It's impossible to put the seeds in it. Or when the ground is still hard. I mean, Stone Age people are natural people. They see the flowers grow. They feel it when they are bitten by an insect. They know when the plants are ripe or the fruits. So it's all nonsense. But this, according to our archaeology, was planned and done at least 2,800 BC, which means, if this is true, this would be older than the Great Pyramid. Only in recent years, to bring this video, exact measurements have been made here. And what happened? Every circle of Stonehenge turns out to represent the average distance from one planet to the other in our solar system. Now, between Mars and Jupiter, it's quite complicated because here you have a big lack. There's the asteroid belt. But no Stone Age man could have seen an asteroid. Again, the idea is not that extraterrestrials move the stone blocks around. No, they simply give the orders because they know the intelligence of the future will find it out by themselves. And they will ask to start the right questions. Again, I have been accused, well, this could be coincidence. Okay, let's have another example. If you travel to Mexico next summer, don't miss this. It's just 40 kilometers away from Mexico City. You can go there by bus. 400 years ago, when the Spanish conquerors came up here, this was all covered with bushes and trees. It was all nearly in ruins. But the Aztecs were living here. So the Spanish conqueror asked the Aztecs, what is this? And they said, we never saw it other than in ruins. We only know it in ruins. But the name of the place have been handed down throughout the generations. The Aztecs told the Spanish conquerors, this place is called Teotihuacan. So they asked, what's the meaning of Teotihuacan? What word? Well, it's the place where the gods and the men have met together. According to archaeology, the planning started at least 1000 BC. Again, we are in Stone Age. Again, they have no writing, they have no measurement tools, they have nothing which is modern, what they could use for their planning. 1000, it's again, 1000 BC was Stone Age. But they must have had eggheads, because these Stone Age planners first planned a gigantic road, large like the biggest boulevard here in Los Angeles. Why have they done this in Stone Age time? And the road, around 4 kilometers long, is laid out exactly in north-south. For what? Stone Age people, why should this look north-south? Not only this, they planned it in such a crazy way that you have two different points of view. Seen from upside down, you see this. Soon as I take the camera down there, in the opposite direction, it's an endless stairway which melts with the pyramids. The stairways to heaven. Now, if anybody is here who knows what this means in planning for Stone Age people, without any modern instrument, it's impossible, but it's not enough. All the buildings here are not just staying somewhere on coincidence. Each and every building, each and every building represents, again, one of our planet, the eclipse, including Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. Pluto is a very, very teeny planet. We ourselves found it just in our century. Nobody could have known it at that time. The idea is not, I just repeat this, that extraterrestrials constructed Teotihuacan. Oh no. But it was the place where the gods met men. So men were very impressed about these gods. And men said, well, now you are living. We want to construct, to make something very, very big so that the future generation will always remember you. All right, the ET said, if you do this, take care that your main axis of the road is pointed out in direction of north and south. And then your buildings, look, make it exactly in this and this and this and this distance. The Stone Age people didn't understand why. But the ETs knew that the intelligence of the future would sooner or later realize it. And then they start up with the questions. And without the question, you have no future questions. Look, if I ask, have we been visited by extraterrestrials in the past? This question comes to my mind not just because of a speculation. It becomes to my mind because of these indications. And soon as I have these questions, I go on and ask me the next question, okay, if we were visited, what proof do we have? Must be something more closer. Maybe there's something which we can find. But before I have not the question, I will not look for proofs. So you need these kind of indications for the generations of the future. And I don't have to go into the past. I can also do it in our generation. In this country, mostly in Arizona, you have the Hopi Indians living. And as you know, the Hopi Indians, since an eternal time, they make these small dolls here, the Kachina dolls. Now ask a Hopi what in reality is a Kachina. Ask an old Hopi. The Kachinas were nothing else than the teachers from heaven for the forefathers of the Hopis. Or go to South America. There you have an Indian tribe like the Kayapo. The Kayapo live in the upper Amazon River. Every year they have a special festivity, and their main medicine man dresses in this peculiar straw garment. The rest of the Indians, they dance around the straw man and they sing his story. Many, many generations ago, there was noise on the nearby mountain. Smoke and fire appeared, and out of the noise and fire, a big creature came down into the village. In the beginning, the Indians were afraid. The stranger had an object in his hand. They imitate it today in this form of wood. From time to time, he pointed with this object to a tree. And then a lightning was seen, and the tree fell down. But he never pointed with this object to one of the human beings. So after a while, they realized that they could not harm him, but he would not harm anyone either. So they made a circle around him. Then they came closer, and they put offerings on his foot, like fishes and flowers and fruits and so on. But he never ate, because he had no opening for his mouth. We have holy books. We have the Bible, old Indian texts. We have the cargo cult, which we can prove. We have living mythologies. And we have hard facts. When you travel to Peru, to the highland of Peru, your guide, your tourist guide, will explain you very quick how an Inca wall looks like. This is a classical, typical Inca wall. Always these stones with different angles put together. Once you know one Inca wall, you know them all. You can say of a distance of a few hundred meters, oh, there's another Inca wall made by the Inca. But this here is not Inca construction. And it's much older than Inca. This is just 400 meters away from the Inca wall you just saw. Here we are above the city of Cusco in Peru, which is about 3,600 meters high. This is not Inca. It looks like concrete. When the Spanish conqueror appeared up here, all this was already existing. The Spanish asked the Inca, what is it? And they said, we don't know, because it's from the time of the gods. Which gods? The gods must have had such powerful weapons that they cut a piece of rock like we would cut a piece of cheese today. Or you go higher. In Bolivia, 4,100 meters high, there is a place called Pumapunku. You see there is no tree, no wood, because we are 4,100 meters high. On the other hand, there is no ice and snow because we are close to the equator. And here, gigantic platforms lay on the ground. These platforms, das kann man schärfer machen. These platforms are composited of granite and diorite or diorite. Diorite, this is a block of diorite, is much harder than granite or granite. I don't know how you say it here. Granite? Granite. So diorite is harder than granite. If you want to cut a piece of diorite, you definitely need hard metal. And everyone who works with stone knows it. But in the textbook they still tell us, well, it was chiseled with bones or with other stones and so on. To chisel such a block of diorite, you need hard metal. Now, the biggest terrace up there went 29 meters in one block. In the meantime, it's destroyed into 3 smaller blocks. The calculated weight is about 900 tons. The Aymara Indians who live up there, very nice people, they had no chance in this height of 4,100 meters, where there was no wood, no wooden rollers, to move a block of 900 tons. Just forget it. Now, if a Stone Age man would chisel out here, well, some angles and something, why would he do this? Because the block had to fit exactly into the next block. But the blocks are so complicated. Look at this. There are so many angles, right angles, perfectly. We still would have problems today to cut out this rectangular here. So if something does this means planning. No way out. Because the counterpart has to fit exactly on it. You see how complicated it is? This means planning. Planning means writing. They had no writing. They had no planning. We are in Stone Age. And indeed, they did it with diorite. Now, we measured up there 22 of these blocks. I had the help of technicians. Back home, we made a computer program, and we asked the computer what fits together in here. Well, I was standing here, and I didn't trust my eyes. It's all prefabricated stones, like Lego, you know. Soon as you want to have a brighter wall, you add more blocks. Soon as you want to have a higher wall, you add more blocks. But this is completely in contradiction of evolution of technology. There is not only an evolution in biology, you have an evolution in technology too. I mean, the car of today is not the same thing of a car which is 40 years old. That's evolution in technology. Here, the oldest blocks are the most perfect ones. Later, only rubbish was added. So what's wrong up here? Again, when the Spanish come, the conquerors, 400 years ago, this was all in ruins. The Spanish asked the Inca, what is this? And they said, no human being has ever seen this in construction. Because long time ago, this was the residence of their god Viracosha. Viracosha was their teacher from heaven. Viracosha later was disappointed by the human beings, and he destroyed his own residence. Why? He didn't want that one of the human tribes would make their installations in here and rule over the other tribes. That's why he destroyed it. But before he disappeared into the sky, he of course promised to come back to Earth. I'm sorry, I smoked too much, that's good. I really believe, because the technique is so complicated up here, that here we have it to do with the home base of the extraterrestrials. Now, you may come and say, come on, extraterrestrials, they have such a high technology, they would never work in stone. They use modern material, I don't know, plastic or whatever. Imagine we go in 20 years to the moon, and we make our installations on the moon, and later on the Mars. For sure, we would not take from our planet steel or iron and stuff like this up to the moon. It's too heavy. We don't take it. What we take from the Earth are, of course, the right plans, the right tools, dynamite, and whatever we need as modern thing, but not the basic constructing material. We know that there are stones up there of different forms and type. We know how to work with stones, how to cut stones, and stone is a wonderful basic material. It doesn't burn. It prevents you from heat and cold and so on. There where you have wild animals, it prevents you from animals. We will use stones on the other planets, stones which already are there. We will not transport our stones from the Earth up there. But we would use it with prefabricated material, as we have seen here. I was talking about cargo cults. You know, in the meantime, what a cargo cult is. Cargo cult is imitating something which you don't understand. The most convincing example for cargo cult is here in the ground, about 3 meters under this pyramid. The pyramid is in Palenque. Palenque is Mexico, Mexico, Yucatan. In 1949, this was all covered with trees, bushes, and so on. You see here the next pyramid, which is still not discovered. Then they found up here a few holes in the ground. Well, that was curious. A big platform was cut out here at this place, and inside they saw the beginning of a stairway. Only the beginning, the first step, because all the rest was full with large stones. It took 3 years to bring these stones out here. They finally ended 3 meters below the pyramid in the ground. And they stand before a door which had the shape of a triangle. Brutally, this door was opened. Now they realized again the shape of a room. But they could not enter the room at that time, because the room was completely covered with stalagmites. Stalagmites? Yes, okay. All these stalagmites were cut off. Now they stand on the ground. There was a large, big stone. This piece is 3 meters 80. It's bigger than the screen. 3 meters 80, 2 meters 20. Its weight is 10 tons. It's 1 block. And here, chiseled on the block, an incredible representation. Somebody is bending forward, almost like a racing motorcyclist. A mask on his nose. He uses his hand to manipulate controls. He's sitting on a chair. He's surrounded by a frame. You see it up here, and it's coming in here. This frame goes all around, and at the end, you will see something like a linking flame, like an exhaust. Of course, shortly after this was discovered, the Maya world was thrown over. Then they were looking for a reasonable answer. What could this be? Professor Dr. Rutz, he was the one who discovered the stone, he said, well, this is a Maya boy. And this Maya boy is falling into the wall of the underground. The next professor, he had a different point of view. He said, no, here we clearly see 1 tooth, and here is another, means 2 teeth, upper and the lower. This is an open mouth. It's the mouth of the underground monster. This monster is called Xialba. So this high priest is falling into the underground. But, he added, as everyone can clearly see here, we have the cross of life, which means death and life are assembled together. We are a very funny society, really. Somebody comes and explains it, that this is the cross of life. Everybody says, oh yeah, of course we see it, it's the cross of life. I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen, something like a cross of life does not exist. It's nothing else than a hollow phrase. It's an invention which comes out of the mouth of someone, and the rest of the world is copying it and brings it in the textbook. And in the universities, our poor students has to learn it. Have you ever had a beer with the cross of life? Of course you could mix the cross of life somehow with Christianity, but this has nothing to do with Christianity. It's a complete different age, complete different culture. The next professor was, by the way, an American, Alden Mason. He said, no, this here in the back, which I just described before, it looks like an exhaust or fiery flame or whatever. This is nothing else than the stylized hairs of the beard of the weather god. This here we clearly can see is the tail of the rattle. Fantastic. A rat, the rat. Rattlesnake, oh, tail, okay, whatever. So, the past 10 years, every tourist who goes down there, and also it's in the modern textbook, is explained that this is Pakal. You have to know the city here is called Palenque. And the family who ruled Palenque was the family of Pakal. This is true. And probably there is no doubt this is Pakal. So it was always suggested that Pakal is on his way to Xialba, and Xialba means the underworld. In the newest archaeological book of Professor Dr. Linda Sheely, she's an American, she died a few months ago, a brilliant lady, by the way. She suggested, well, maybe this could be seen as the Milky Way and this the firmament. So Pakal is in reality not on the way to the underworld, but is on the way to the Milky Way. Maybe situation changes after a few years. You see a writing all around. These are called glyphs, Maya glyphs. Some of these glyphs are known. For example, we know exactly the Maya calendar. The oldest date which you found here, translated into our modern calendar, gives the date for August 14th, 3114 BC. At that time, the family Pakal was not even existing. The Mayas did not exist. August 14, 3114 in our calendar dates. So many things are still controversial. Okay, even it is Pakal, I agree maybe, this Pakal, good. But what is he doing in this silly possession? Now, I have been accused, and still am accused, that it is not correct to show to the public this plate in this form you see it, you know, in this enlarged form. Because in fact, the entry, when you come down the stair, is from this side. So it has been said, we should turn this tombstone on the other side, which would give a complete different opinion. Looks like this now. Now, as soon as I see this, I of course have my inspirations, because I travel every year still about 100,000 kilometers in flight. And when I see something like this, I said to myself, now come on. I saw this before, 20,000 kilometers away, far away, in Asia. Jetzt muss dann das Dings wechseln, schnell. In Asia, doesn't matter if you are in India or in Java or whatever, you always will find the architectural form, the temple form of the stupa. You will just see a stupa. Hast du es drin? Okay, I tried. Okay. This is a stupa here. This temple here is the Borobudur in Middle Java. It's composed of over 144 stupas. In Buddhism, the stupa has different meanings. But we do not need Buddhism, because this form, the architectural shape, is older than Buddhism. It dates back to the predecessors of the Buddhism, which were the Jainas, the religion of the China. And among the Jaina, the stupa had only one meaning. The stupa was a chariot to the gods. They believed when a priest wanted to reach the world of the gods, he had to make special washings, cleanings. He had to put special clothes on, and then he had to climb into this stupa. In fact, in every stupa, somebody is sitting. Now, because this is a Buddhistic temple, you see young Buddha in here. And what is he doing here? With his elbows and his hands, he's manipulating some control. Because the belief was, once he is in the stupa, and he wants to reach the world of the gods, he has to do special symbolic movements with his hands. Now let's go back to Mexico, where we just were before. If you look at this way, here you have the tower of the stupa. You have the shape like the bell of the stupa. And here the man sits with his elbows and uses his hands to manipulate some controls. Because all over the world we had the same examples. It's nothing more than cargo cult. But we humans, clever, intelligent, we made out religious of it. Thank you, God. Fantastic. An example which, of course, das kann man noch schärfer haben, an example which, of course, is worldwide, and here I really can bring you news, is the Great Pyramid. According to Egyptologists, there are no secrets. They hate secrets. The pyramid is very simple. It was constructed 2500 BC by a pharaoh, a king of the name of Cheops. And he had 100,000 slaves, or free men, who helped him. The building was constructed within 20 years. In the building itself, there are only two rooms. One room is called the King's Chamber, and the lower room is called the Queen's Chamber. That's all, and of course the corridors which led to the two rooms. That's all which you have to know in archaeology about the Great Pyramid. There are no mysteries, whatever. But we in our Western world, with our Western education, we are never told, nobody tells us what the old Arabian historians say about the construction of the pyramid. And with old Arabians, I do not mean a grandfather of today. I mean the people who have been writing down 1,000 years more in the past. Brilliant men. What is the outcome of their books? They write, it all took place before the Great Flood. Mankind at that time was so primitive that they were still eating and drinking with the animals at the same place. But then the skies opened, and many little barges, ships, have come down to earth. You remember in old India it was called the Vimanas. Ezekiel describes one of it. Now we are in Egypt. The barges, the ships of the gods, came down. Out of the ships, the teachers from heaven descended. In the beginning, they installed the first school in the land of Nile. Then they used force to force these primitive beings into the schools. After some months or weeks, we don't know, they realized that some of these primitives were not primitive. There were quite intelligent ones among them. And the most intelligent one they called Saurit, the Arabian form Saurit. And then the historians say clearly, Saurit is the same which the Hebrew community calls Enoch. Be careful now. According to Arabian tradition, this happened before the Great Flood. They say Saurit, who was the most intelligent one, is the same which the Hebrew community call Enoch. So let's go to the Hebrew history, switch to the Hebrew history, before the Great Flood, which is again the Old Testament, the Bible. Before the Great Flood, you have 10 prophets or 10 patriarchs. One of them had the name Enoch. And according to the Bible, Enoch is the first man who disappears from this planet in a fiery chariot. So here I have a link again. Now I stay with the name of Saurit, but you always have in mind Saurit and Enoch, the same figure. So Saurit was the most intelligent one, and they learned him how to write. After he could write, they dictated him 300 books. By the way, in the story of Enoch, you read a similar story, but now I stay with the Arab tradition. They dictated him 300 books. While he was writing, one of the teachers from heaven appeared and said, a terrible water catastrophe would destroy the surface of the earth. Saurit heard this, and he said, well, in that case, it was all for nothing what they taught him. All his books would disappear, and mankind, after the Great Flood, must begin again from the beginning. So they had nothing to learn from their time. And he kindly asked the teacher from heaven to construct a gigantic building. In this building, he would make different small rooms. And in these rooms, he would put all his books so that after the water, they should not restart again. And he would make this whole building waterproof by laying stone plates all over. This is true. You still have some of these plates down here. It was all covered once with these big stone plates. So clear, so nearly that you cannot even put a razor blade or plate between it. So it was waterproof. That's Arabian history. Our Western scientists, our Egyptologists, they think this is all nonsense. There are no little rooms with books in there. There are no mystery. This is all just fairy tales of the Arabs. Who is correct? When you as a tourist climb into the Great Pyramid today, you have to climb into this hole. Why did it appear? This looks rather like an entry. In the year 823 AD, this was still covered with stone plates. Then the ruler of Egypt, his name was Caliph al-Mamun, he knew that there are treasures inside, and he wanted to have the treasures. Now, because it was all covered with stone plates, there was no entry to see. And he gave the order just to dig this hole inside the pyramid. What happened? So if today, as a tourist, you climb in here, in the beginning you really have the impression, this is not the pyramid, this is not the building, I'm climbing into a rock, into a rock. You see this here. But then after a few meters, you enter into the first corridor where you have to climb up. Now, you yourself, you have to make yourself very small. Down here, it's very narrow. You climb up here, after more or less 10 meters, you arrive into the great gallery. And here the mysteries begin. They also begin for the scientists, because no one understands why these constructors of this building made first this low, narrow corridor, so low that you really have to climb in a terrible way, and it's so low that you could not even put a sarcophagi inside. And then all of a sudden, you have a 10-meter high gallery. Why that? Nobody understands. Here where it's dark, there is the entry to the so-called King's Chamber, and 23 meters below is the Queen's Chamber, a little smaller. And in the south wall of the Queen's Chamber, there is a little hole. It's rectangular. Some tourists have lights with them. They look inside, and you see it's a shaft. The shaft is about 2 meters horizontal, so flat. And after 2 meters, you realize at the end it's going upside in the pyramid. In the textbooks of archaeology, you read that this shaft is a blind shaft. It's only about 8 meters long, and then it has a dead end. It doesn't continue. It's made symbolically, they say, so that the soul of the pharaoh could disappear after he's dead to the gods up there, or Osiris, Isis, and so on. One of my friends, a German engineer, he was an unbeliever, and he constructed with his own hands a small robot. Now, this robot is not bigger than a bottle of wine. It's a small machine. Down here, you have rubber, like a little tank, so that you have force to climb inside up the pyramid. The upper side here, there is a hydro, wie sagt man das? Wie heißt das schon wieder? Yeah, hydraulics, thank you for your help. You can put this part up so that it gives you force on the ceiling also. 2 special halogen lamps have been constructed, a special video camera, and down there is a laser beamer. With this laser beamer you can measure the distance to the next wall. First, it took many months before Rudolf Gantenbrink received the permission to move with his robot into this shaft. Finally, the Egyptologist said, oh, come on, let him do, because the shaft is anyhow just 8 meters long, and then it's a dead end, so what for? Okay, move in with your stupid robot. And something incredible happened. Bring this build. While you see these pictures, which by the way are exclusive, you have to be absolutely aware that this shaft was constructed at the same time with the pyramid. It was not possible the other way around. You cannot finish the pyramid, and now a priest arrives and says, hey, I need a shaft now. But with 20 centimeters in diameter, 20 centimeters, not even a Lilliput man could go in and chisel it. So the shaft was constructed at the same time with the pyramid. As higher the pyramid went, as higher the shaft went. That means the ceiling was not here during the construction. There was daylight inside. So nothing what you see is coincidence. They wanted to have it the way it is. The robot passed different forms of stone, granite, diorite, sandstone. Of a sudden, the whole shaft was covered with small, small little stones, including the ceiling. You will see it later. The robot passed doorways, and down in the Queen's chamber, there was a small monitor, and 7 Egyptologists were sitting before. Their faces became longer and longer and longer. They all believed, well, after 8 meters, this is over. But the robot went higher and higher. It is a degree of the angle of 40.1 degree. Went higher and higher. 20 meters, 40 meters, 30 meters, 50 meters, then 60 meters. And the robot reached a point 64 meters, and a door appeared. This door has 2 metallic clamps. One of them, seen from your side, the left one, is broken down. So the robot was looking for this broken piece. Should be down here. But it was not there. It was found later on the right side. And it is definitely a piece of metal. What do we do now? We were always so sure there are no secrets. There are no little rooms in it. So what now? There was no metal in time of Pharaoh Cheops, 5,000 years ago. This here is alabaster. Until today, we do not know what this really is. I mean, should you pull it out, press it in, should you turn it? Or is this maybe just the opposite of something which from the other side looks completely different? If you imagine the shape of the pyramid, the point where we are now here, you still have 23 meters to the outside wall. Enough room for rooms. The door itself doesn't lay on the ground. You will see the laser beam going under the door. On the right side, a small triangle is missing, and black dust is coming out there, which is an indication that there must be something behind it. Otherwise, nothing can come out. And usually it is normal when you make a door, there is something behind the door. But not in Egyptology. It is nearly 6 years since this sensational discovery was made. You maybe read something in the newspapers or a few things in television. So one should believe that after 6 years, finally, they have opened the door. Where is the scientific curiosity? But nothing happens. At least not in public. I have very good information down to Egypt and to people who work here, and we know something is going on. But the public is not informed. Can somebody explain me why? Who is afraid of what's behind the door? We have the technology to make a landing on the moon, and you can watch the landing on the moon on your TV screen at home. We have the technology exactly to do the same thing here. While the door is opened, step by step, you can see it at your TV at home. But somebody is preventing this. And obviously they do not understand that they lose their whole credibility. Because soon, maybe in a few months or so, if they come and show us on TV the open door now, and they tell us, well, as we expected, there was nothing behind it, we don't believe it anymore. It's over, the credibility. They have to do it in public. Otherwise, it's a censorship. We all are old enough and intelligent enough to see what's behind the door. And if there is nothing behind the door, okay, there was nothing. But you should not work this way with humans. And we are intelligent beings. We have a right to know. What about the freedom of information? What about the journalists who always ask questions? Why in this case nobody questions and questions and questions? It's just quiet. Silence around the globe. And there is the door and the mystery. Well, nothing goes on. Is this science or what? Another mystery far away in Peru is Nazca. Nazca is 480 kilometers south of the airport of Lima. I suggest everyone, when you go there, just rent a car. Then take the road to the south, always to the south, in direction of Chile. You can't miss it, there's only one town. I made this about 20 times. In the beginning, 30 years ago, it was terrible. It's just a terrible desert, very, very hot, dirty, dusty. So in the meantime, it's a pleasure. The whole road down there is paved. Now it's still desert, of course. From time to time, there comes an Indian village, and maybe you may have hot, and you make a stop, and you drink a Coke or something, and you look around, and you see nothing. Desert, dry mountains in the back, and maybe stones. They have a color, a rusty color. And finally, after 470 kilometers, you arrive in Nazca. It's a little city. There is a small airport, and there you can rent propellant aircrafts for $150. And they fly you over the plain of Nazca. Now the same thing, which you just have crossed by your car. You can't believe it. But you see down in Nazca, in the desert. Bring this bild. You see gigantic figures. You're not very clear. Kann man da schärfer einstellen, verdammt nochmal? Doch, das geht. There was a spider. Here is a bird. There should be a flower. So there are figures in the ground, but these figures are of such overdimensional size that you can see them only from the air. When you are on the ground, you see nothing. Only from the air. Now, all kinds of suggestions have been made what this should be. Wenn du an einem Ring drehst, also nicht an dem, was vergrößert, am anderen geht's schärfer. Ihr blöde Sie. Ja, das ist der richtige. Versuch's nochmal. I'm sorry. Okay, das ist schon ein bisschen besser. Jetzt haben wir es. Now it's a little better than before. All these figures are made out of one line. Look, take a piece of paper and a pencil. And now you make a design, but you may never take the pencil off. It's all on one piece. That's how it's made. The next thing you see are big lines looking like, well, airstrips. By the way, I never said that this is an airport. I said, seen from the air, it looks like, which in reality does. But I'm always quoted that this is Erich von Däniken's spaceport. So, you see these gigantic lines looking like airstrips, and then small lines. Of these small lines, over 2,800 exist. The longest of it is 23 kilometers long. That's quite a size. What do you think when you see this? Doesn't it look like an airstrip? This is Nazca, original Nazca. About Nazca, many, many theories exist. The first theory came from Miss Maria Reiche. She was a German lady. She spent her life here to solve this mystery of Nazca. She died a few months ago. Maria Reiche was of the opinion, well, it must be a calendar. Because in fact, some of the small lines, they have to do with the calendar. On the 21st of March, you see the sun rising up over one line. But this is only true for 8 lines. What about the rest? 2,800, they have all nothing to do with the calendar. An American fellow, his name is Jim Woodman, came up, and he declared Nazca to be the start place for the hot air balloons of the Inca rulers. Well, I'm sorry, 400 years ago, the Spanish conquerors arrived here. The Incas had no hot air balloons. If they would have had, they would obviously fly around the Spanish heads. Then there are always new ideas about Nazca. Every 2 years, I read a new idea. It was suggested, well, it was a cult for the water god. Okay. Another said it was a cult for the god of the mountains. Then it was a cult for agriculture. Also, there is no agriculture. Every 2 years in the scientific books, there is a new theory coming out, but never any proof. On the mountain, by the way, you find many figures with halos or helmets around their head. Here is one. This is 29 meters high. One arm is pointed to the sky, the other one to the ground. Today, this figure is called El Astronauta. Of course, I myself have also a theory about Nazca. I know, because of the Indian books, that thousands of years in the past, gigantic space cities surrounded the Earth. I know that smaller vehicles, the Vimana, have come down. So I suggested one of the Vimana made a landing here. Of course, they do not need an airstrip for it. There's nobody there anyhow to construct an airstrip for them in the beginning. But simply by coming down, It doesn't matter in what way. If they take an air cushion or whatever, simply by coming down, small stones and sand is blown away. And all what is left behind them is a trace, until to the standstill. That's all. Now they make some measurements. Maybe they use minerals, metals, they look for uranium or whatever. And after a short time, they leave again. And of course, they were watched by the natives. And the natives were afraid. After the gods had left, all what is in the ground is this line. And now the cult starts, the cargo cult. The natives believe, well, the god made these lines because they wanted that we make lines for them. So they start to create lines to the north and east and south and west, large and thin lines of all kinds. After some generation, of course, they are expecting the returning of the gods, but the gods do not return. Now one of the priests may have a bright idea. Priests always have bright ideas. He suggests, well, we must give signs to the gods. We must show them that we have offerings for them. And now they start to carve gigantic figures in the ground. That was the theory I have brought forward, and not the stupidity which I read every day, and including in the scientific books. They never read my books. They just criticize. In Chariots of the Gods, I had 238 question marks. Nobody saw the question marks. Very strange. In the meantime, I'm sorry, I was here so many times, really, over 20 times. I have a book on the market, it's not in back here, it's called The Arrival of the Gods. And this book, finally back on the American market, this book is only about Nazca, 150 pictures. Last time, 2 years ago when I was there, I asked the pilot, listen, the desert, I know enough, I know every detail about the desert. Let's fly into the mountain. I have time. Every day at morning at 6 o'clock, I'm there, we fly into the mountain. And you take care that I miss nothing. Not one valley, not one mountain, nothing. What you see now are all pictures out of the mountain. Can someone tell me what this is? This is not in the flatland. It's in the mountain. What is it? It looks like an airstrip with two accompanying line. What about these stairways here? I don't know. In the wise books you read, well, this was very, very easy to make. It took 2 or 3 generations. You see 2 lines coming together here. Under this line here, was once a larger one, which went back here. And number 3 is going under it. I'm talking about people, about the generation who had no dynamite, no iron, no metal. All what they have is their hands. Or you read in the wise books, well, it was very, very easy. All they had to do is to scratch away with their foot the surface of the ground. And then a brighter shining ground appeared. This is not true. Imagine this would have been made by scratching away the stones of the surface. Okay. Now you have a zigzag line below. And in some places here, you see the zigzag line still shimmering through this one. If you scratch away all this, the zigzag would disappear. And even down in the desert, there are many places where you have first the lines, the figures, and then comes what looks like an airstrip. And if there are still people here who believe, well, that was very easy, it was just a cult done with their hands, you should clearly watch this. Keep it in your mind, in your memory, because you never see it. You never see it in the newspapers or whatever. To lay out this line, you first had to cut down all the mountains around, make it completely flat. For what purpose? Why? With what tools? What instruments? And then for the first time in the mountain, geometrical figures. This is very, very big. You know, it starts in the middle with a point and rays all over. Then you have different squares, 8. You have a circle with hundreds of points, a bigger circle with other points. There are 2 squares around. Now when you go higher with the aircraft, you realize that this is only part of a bigger geometrical pattern. Continues back there. And you go higher again, the figure becomes bigger. Starts down here now, goes over here, and there. Now I don't know what it is, but one thing is absolutely clear. If you would climb up here as a tourist, it's terribly hot. It has a lot of scorpions. If you climb up here, all what you have beneath your feet is a little point. That's all. You cannot overlook it. It's too big. This is about around 700 meters. So can somebody tell me why someone in the past made gigantical geometrical figures which someone else can only see from the air? Obviously they believe that somebody was flying up there. Otherwise it makes absolutely no sense. And in some of the mountain slopes and hills, there are some kind of messages. What is this? I don't know. But these things are there. They are in my book, The Arrival of the Gods. They exist. Everything which you see in this speech exists. It's all a question of interpretation. But the few things cannot be interpreted anymore because they are clear. And if someone still has the latest doubts that we were visited by extraterrestrials in the past, I suggest that you go down to Mexico next year on the 21st of March. And you go to Chichen Itza. Chichen Itza is in Yucatan. It's a tourist place. There's even a highway between Cancun and Chichen Itza. In Chichen Itza, the main pyramid is dedicated to the god of Kukulkan. Kukulkan is always represented in the form of a feathered serpent. And Kukulkan always is located exactly on the stairways of the pyramid. Here you see Kukulkan, this is his head, the feathered serpent. All through its broken hair, this should be the feathers. But exactly on the stairway, right and left side. Now, if we would be in Egypt, this pyramid would be laid out in direction of north-south. Not here. The north-south line crosses the pyramid. And this on purpose. Because the Maya priests, they wanted to show to the future generations for eternity how God Kukulkan descends to us. You see, the pyramid has 9 platforms. As higher the pyramid becomes, the platform becomes smaller. The pyramid has a certain angle. It's not a tower like this. It has exactly this angle. And the astronomical orientation goes through the pyramid. On the 21st of March, in the early morning, when the sun goes up, one part of the pyramid is shining bright. The other part is dark. As higher the sun climbs, exactly on the stair where God Kukulkan is represented, image of light and shadow climbs down the stair. The sun goes up here, God Kukulkan comes down the stair. Still to see every year. This is a clear demonstration of what happened long time ago. But this generation is still too stupid to open their eyes. Sometimes I have the impression that we have 2 groups of human beings on this planet. One group is educated religiously. They believe that God made everything, the creation and so on, but as the crown of creation, he made us. The other group is rather scientifically, they know everything about evolution, mutation, selection and so on, but we are the top of evolution. Have you ever remarked that in both cases, if we take us as crown of creation or top of evolution, we are the greatest? Something like us does not exist in the whole universe anymore. We are looking down to our neighbor. We are the greatest. In fact, some people, most of it, they do not want extraterrestrials because the extraterrestrials would cut their uniqueness. They are not unique anymore. It's a psychological problem. And this psychological problem is faced not only in religion, also in theology and of course in science. They are afraid, psychologically, to accept that we are not the greatest. That's how the situation is on this planet. It's completely silly. I really know that when these extraterrestrials left the planet thousands of years ago, they promised to return in the far future. We know this. You know the Kayapo dancers, the one in straw garment? They tell it us. The old Indians tell it us. They promised to return. And what do we have today in our religions? We Christians accept the returning of Jesus. The Muslim community is waiting for the returning of their Mahdi. As we know, the Jewish community, long time ago, they wait for the returning of their Messiah, and so on. Every big religion of today, also the small cults, they have this expectation of somebody to return. I know that thousands of years ago, the extraterrestrials promised to return, and they will return, sooner or later. I feel it is more responsible against mankind to talk about these things openly, not to hide it down, because then mankind is shocked when they really return, because they have been waiting for Jesus or Messiah or Mahdi or whatever. What shows up? Extraterrestrials. Ladies and gentlemen, all this, what I told you here, has nothing to do with any new religion or any new sect. You don't have to believe absolutely nothing. The facts are here, the old books are here. It's a question how you take it up and how you look at it. I would turn myself into my tomb if after my death some idiots come up and make out a new religion of this or a new cult. It is simply fact. Just look at it with modern eyes, and sooner or later you will come to a similar conclusion.
Thank you, Mr. von Däniken.